You check on the hamster cage one morning, and there are fewer babies than there were the night before. Nothing broke in. Nothing got out. The only thing in that cage capable of what just happened was the mother herself. If you've ever owned a hamster, there's a decent chance you've heard a version of this story, usually told in a hushed, slightly horrified tone. A mother hamster, gentle, fluffy, completely unthreatening looking, somehow ends up responsible for the disappearance of her own newborns. And the strange part isn't that it happens. The strange part is how calm it usually looks when it does. This isn't a glitch in nature. It isn't an accident, and it isn't random cruelty. What you're looking at, if you ever witness it, is one of the most calculated survival behaviors in the entire animal kingdom. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why a hamster's brain is built to make that decision, and why it almost always happens inside the exact same 72-hour window. Let's start with the obvious question. Why would any mother do this? The short answer is that hamster mothers aren't malicious. They're making a brutal, fast, biological calculation, and most of the time, you'll never even know it's happening unless you're watching closely. Scientists call this behavior filial cannibalism. It's not unique to hamsters. Plenty of species do versions of this, but hamsters do it in a way that's specific, predictable, and tied directly to a handful of triggers that have been studied extensively by people who breed and study rodents for a living. Here's the first trigger, and it's the one that surprises people the most. Diet. Specifically, a lack of vitamin B3, also known as niacin. Hamsters that are fed a diet heavy in corn, which sounds harmless, are at dramatically higher risk of this behavior because corn is low in B3 and high in everything that doesn't help a nursing mother's body function properly. A hamster running on a B3 deficiency isn't thinking clearly in the way you'd want a new mother to think. Her body is sending signals that something is wrong, and unfortunately, one of the outputs of that signal can be aggression toward her own litter. But diet alone doesn't explain most cases. The bigger trigger, by far, is stress. Hamsters are prey animals. In the wild, that means their entire nervous system is built around one core priority: detecting threats before those threats detect them. A hamster that feels unsafe isn't behaving abnormally when it panics. It's behaving exactly the way millions of years of evolution trained it to behave. The problem is that motherhood, especially in the first few days, makes a hamster more vulnerable than almost any other point in its life. She can't run. She can't easily defend a den full of newborns, and her brain knows this. So when something disrupts that fragile window, loud noise, an unfamiliar smell, a predator nearby, even something as simple as a human checking on the cage too often, her nervous system can interpret the disturbance as a signal that the nest isn't safe enough to protect. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. When that happens, evolution didn't build hamsters to simply abandon their young and run. It built something colder, and in a strange way, more efficient. If the mother believes she cannot protect the entire litter, or that the nest has been compromised, her body can trigger a response that prioritizes survival of some offspring over loss of all of them. Killing and consuming a portion of the litter accomplishes two things at once. It reduces the number of mouths she has to feed and protect during a moment of crisis, and it removes evidence, in a literal sense, that could attract predators to the den. A pile of dead, scentless newborns left in the nest is a liability. Eating them erases the problem entirely. This is the part that sounds horrifying on the surface, but functions, biologically, almost like damage control. There's a specific window where this risk spikes dramatically: the first 72 hours after birth. During this period, the mother is hormonally overwhelmed, physically exhausted from labor, and operating with almost zero margin for additional stress. Her threat detection system is cranked to maximum sensitivity. This is exactly why experienced hamster breeders give one piece of advice above almost everything else: do not disturb the cage during this window unless it's absolutely necessary. Not even to clean it. Not even to peek. The simple act of a human hand getting too close, or an unfamiliar scent drifting into the nest, can be enough to trigger exactly the response we're talking about. And here's where it gets even stranger, because age and experience play a massive role too. First-time mothers are significantly more likely to engage in this behavior than experienced mothers. Some researchers believe this comes down to a kind of behavioral inexperience, the same way a first-time parent of any species might misjudge a situation simply because they haven't been through it before. A young female who's never successfully raised a litter doesn't have the same calibrated response to stress that an older, experienced mother does. Her body still defaults to the most extreme, most conservative survival strategy available because she has no track record telling her otherwise. But there's a darker layer to this story, one that doesn't involve mothers at all. In some hamster species, males have been observed killing unrelated young that aren't their own offspring. This sounds purely vicious until you understand the mechanism behind it. A female hamster typically won't go back into a fertile cycle while she's actively nursing a litter. If a male kills that litter, intentionally, her body responds by returning to fertility almost immediately, which means that male now has an opportunity to mate with her and produce his own offspring instead. It's a cold, evolutionary shortcut, and it's one of the clearest examples in nature of a behavior that looks monstrous from a human perspective, but makes complete genetic sense from the animals. This is also why pet stores and breeders almost universally recommend housing hamsters alone, particularly species like Syrian hamsters, which are some of the most solitary territorial rodents you can own. Put two adult hamsters of certain species together, even ones that seem to get along at first, and you're not just risking a fight. You're risking exactly the kind of resource competition and territorial stress that can escalate into cannibalism between adults, not just toward newborns. So how rare is this really in the wild, away from cages and pet stores? Here's the twist that conservationists studying wild hamster populations have pointed out repeatedly. Cannibalism in truly wild hamsters is actually rare. The behavior we're describing happens far more often in captivity, specifically inside the pet trade, where hamsters are frequently kept in conditions that practically guarantee the exact triggers we just walked through. Overcrowded bins, limited resources, forced proximity to other hamsters, stress levels that would almost never occur naturally in a wild burrow system, where a hamster has space, privacy, and full control over her environment. In other words, what looks like a strange, almost sinister quirk of hamster biology is, in a lot of cases, actually a stress response to human-created conditions. Wild hamsters, given space and safety, rarely need to make this calculation at all, because the triggers that force the decision simply don't show up as often outside captivity. This reframes the entire story. The behavior itself isn't some bizarre evolutionary glitch unique to hamsters being secretly monstrous. It's an ancient, conserved survival mechanism, present in plenty of other rodent species too, that gets activated far more frequently in artificial environments that accidentally recreate every single trigger condition at once. Think about what a typical pet store enclosure looks like from a hamster's evolutionary perspective. Bright lighting at unpredictable hours, strange smells from cleaning products, constant handling from strangers, limited burrow space, other hamsters nearby competing for resources. From a wild hamster's nervous system, that environment doesn't read as a cozy home. It reads as a high-stress survival emergency, every single day. So the actual lesson here isn't hamsters are secretly horrifying. It's closer to this. An animal's most extreme survival instincts don't disappear just because we've domesticated it and put it in a glass tank in a bedroom. The wiring is still ancient. The triggers are still the same triggers that mattered in a wild burrow a million years ago. We've just changed the environment around that wiring, often without realizing how many of those old triggers we're accidentally flipping on at once. That's the real reason this behavior surprises so many pet owners. It's not that hamsters are uniquely capable of something disturbing. It's that we've built an environment that resembles, almost perfectly, the exact set of conditions evolution designed this response to handle. So the next time you walk past a hamster cage, Calm, quiet, seemingly harmless. Remember that underneath that fur is a nervous system still running code written for a much harder world. Most of the time, that code never gets triggered. But for 72 hours after birth, in the wrong conditions, it's running closer to the surface than almost anyone expects. And somewhere in a quiet bedroom tonight, a new hamster mother is making a calculation you'll never see, using instincts you'll never witness directly, built for a world that no longer fits inside a glass tank.